yourself and feel something you've never felt when he asks what else with Corey Man.
1986 version of Corey probably wouldn't believe if 2024 Corey called him and said, "You're going to chat with one of your heroes today." Michael W. Smith, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
First off, tell me about the beautiful painting behind you. I'm a lover of art, and I can't quite figure out what I'm looking at.
Yeah, well, this was a gift from my wife. This is Michael the Archangel, and I think she gave it to me for my 50th birthday, if I'm not mistaken. And we've always loved it, and so I don't think it's going anywhere. We're going to keep it right there.
I'll have our fact checkers on staff see when she gave you that. I'll get them on that right now.
It might have been earlier than that. So,
Michael, I would love to start with a story. Tell me about the day you decided to follow Jesus.
I was 10 years old, sitting in the back pew with all my buddies, probably drawing football plays or something. I don't know. Our pastor gave this message, which I'd heard over and over again, and the light bulb went off. It's almost like it was an epiphany. Like, oh my gosh, this is really true. I got up, walked down the aisle. All my buddies were going, "Oh my gosh, what's he doing?" I walked down and gave my heart to Christ. I'll never forget it. Remember every little detail of it.
You and I have a lot in common as I was doing prep work, just little points of contact. I gave my life to the Lord at an early age, I think maybe 12 times at church camp or revival night or church camp again. But I walked away, but I came back because there was a realization. I think I matured a little bit in life, obviously. Did you have something like that, or were you fully in at 10?
I was fully in at 10. You know, I've written books about it. 17, I walked away from the Lord, and I became a prodigal for 4 years, and that was not good. I almost died a few times, and thank God for praying mom and dad who never gave up on me. And then it was the November of 1979 that I had a nervous breakdown and cried and wept and convulsed on the kitchen floor for 3.5 hours. And felt like at 3 a.m. in the morning that Yahweh was on the ground with me with his arm around me. I haven't been the same since then.
A nervous breakdown at that young of an age, just a culmination of everything you were going through in life, everything you were dealing with, and just a collision.
Yeah, but I knew that I was on the wrong path. And then, you know, I had a near drug overdose in 78. And then I just knew that if something didn't happen, I was going to lose my life. And I knew that God had a call in my life. I was destined for greatness. I was destined to do something for the kingdom and fall in love with him. And so that's when I began to pray all these crazy prayers. Just, God, do whatever you have to do to get my attention. Break my legs, car wreck, just don't kill me. You know, those kind of prayers. And he did something that I thought I never saw it coming. You know, I've never been depressed in my life. I've always been up and very joyful and confident and optimistic. And I became depressed, and I hit rock bottom. That's what I did. That's, you know, you hear all these stories about people hitting rock bottom, whether that's with addiction or whatever. But I hit rock bottom, and I lost it, and I thought I can't do this anymore. And that's when I just began to have all these, you know, shakes and weeping and crying and just and it lasted a long time. And like I said, it was almost 3.5 hours. And I remember every little detail about that. I know exactly where I was. I was on a linoleum kitchen floor in my apartment in Nashville.
What did West Virginia look like through the eyes of a young Michael Smith?
A lot of coal, a lot of trains. You know, I grew up in a little town called Canova, West Virginia. Ohio was right across the river, so was Kentucky. That's where Canova comes from, K-E-N for Kentucky, O for Ohio, V-A for Virginia. And so we were really surrounded by railroad tracks. So I just would hear trains all the time. And it was a small town. You know, my mom was church secretary. My dad was my baseball coach all growing up. I was a big baseball player. And I was involved in my church. I mean, I was very involved in choir and all that. But it all just felt very small to me. But I didn't know anything different than that. I mean, I knew at 15 when I had this epiphany where I'm not going to be a professional baseball player. I was actually a pretty good player, but lost my love for that. And when music came into the picture, I knew at 15 going, you know, I'm probably not going to do what I think God wants me to do living in Canova for the rest of my life. So I knew at that point I'm probably going to move, and I probably belong in LA. I'm not going to move to Nashville. It's country music, you know. So, and it was either New York, but that's a whole other story in itself. So, you know, 5 years later, at 20 years old, I'm in an old beat up Chevrolet driving down Interstate 64, leaving my mom and dad and coming to Nashville. And I never went back. I went back every 3 months to get some money. But yeah, and I've been here ever since.
Michael, seeing the coal, seeing the trains, did you ever have an impression of, if I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to have to do that? Or did you have a big enough dream where I'm going to do this other thing to get out of here?
Well, I did think about trying to do what my dad did. My dad worked at Ashland Oil Refinery, which is right across the river, you know, into Kentucky. You know, and I remember talking to my dad about getting a job there. And I kept thinking, gosh, if I do that, then I'm not going to ever get out of here. And so the more and more I thought about it, and even talking to my dad about it, going, I'm not sure that's the right move for you. And especially as I began to progress in my music, and all my friends were saying, you got to go to Nashville. You got to do something. It's great. You know, it's great, you know, and they were all just encouraging me. So the dreams of working at oil refinery probably only lasted a couple months, and I knew that probably was not my destiny. I need to get in that beat up Chevrolet and go someplace.
Tell me about baseball real quick. I heard that in there. What position did you play?
I played shortstop.
And you were pretty good?
I was pretty good. I mean, I look back on it now, probably wasn't strong enough or big enough, but I had just really good hand-eye coordination. My dad was a minor league ball player. He taught me a lot. He batted left. I batted left. You know, I just knew a lot about the game, and I loved it. And I was on the baseball field every single day of my life, you know, up till 15. And then I lost, you know, that 15 was the first year I didn't make the All-Stars. And I sort of my passion for baseball sort of diminished. And all of a sudden I'm beating around on this piano, coming up with all these crazy melodies and listening to Kansas and Billy Joel and Elton John and Andre Crouch and Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill. So there's this whole pop world and rock and roll world and this whole batch of this whole, you know, contemporary Christian music coming out of Southern California that completely changed my life.
Was there a piano in your house growing up? Was there music in the house? Did Paul and Barbara have records playing constantly?
Always. And we lived with my grandmother. They moved in after they got married because my grandfather died before I was even born, and they never left. I just grew up with two moms. I had my mom and dad, my grandmother, and my sister. But we had an upright piano, and my grandmother was an organist at the Presbyterian Church. She gave me piano lessons, which is probably, at the end of the day, probably not good to take from a relative, you know, and I'm playing by ear, and I'm telling her to play me the songs first, and then I could play it back, and that's a whole other story. But very musical, and my mom and dad sang in the choir. My dad sounded like Frank Sinatra. He was a crooner. My sister played piano. Yeah, there's a lot of music.
In 1989, I was a classic lost teenager trying to figure out my way, and my girlfriend at the time took me to see Robin Williams in Good Morning Vietnam. And I can remember pointing at the screen, Michael, and going, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. Was there a specific song that triggered that, or music in general? Or was there something that you finally went, hang on a minute, I want to learn this?
Well, I do remember one pivotal moment when this was 1973 or 74, whenever that was, when I walked into and I was playing music, and I was really involved in my choir, and I went into a consignment shop. I don't know actually why I walked in there. I think I was over there because they had a little record bin, and I was going to go buy me a Beatles LP. And I was thumbing through the records, and then this record, this white cover with this big red Maranatha sign. And at the top, it said, "The Everlasting Living Jesus Music Concert." And I turned it around, and all these people got long hair, and they're all singing about Jesus. And I remember at that point, I went, that's what I want to do. I remember it vividly. That's what I want to do. I want to be Elton John, but I want to talk about my faith. That's where it all began.
Paul and Barbara, give me one big life lesson from your parents that you still recall today, and it's part of your DNA.
They were kind. They would kill people with kindness, and not that they didn't have to try. That's just part of who they were. My mom and dad were more popular than I was. I remember getting that, and just in the unconditional love, and not kicking me out of the house. And they knew when I went through that prodigal years, they never yelled at me. They never threatened me. They just kept loving me through all the crazy bad choices I was making. But everybody knew my mom and dad. I'd get stopped in the store, and I could always tell when somebody's stalking me. Somebody kind of followed me. They'd end up in the same aisle, and then they end up in the same aisle again. And you let them catch up, and they walk up and they go, "You're Michael W. Smith." "Well, yeah, it's nice to meet you." And they go, "Oh, we love your mom and dad." And they would sit there for 10 minutes as the milk's getting warm. They would sit there and tell me how much they love my mom and dad. That happened every 2 weeks for 20 years.
You and I have something else in common. Only one semester.
Marshall University.
Well, I had 30 days at Lake Michigan College. It just did not work out. If a Belmont or a Lipscomb called you and made you a deal you couldn't refuse, what would you teach for one semester? If I could have you as my teacher, what would you like to teach?
I would probably teach on character. The first thing I would say to all my students going, "It's not about you." Probably teach some life. If I was teaching music, I obviously would be a part of the curriculum, but I would probably spend a lot of time on life lessons, and probably teach my class on what my mom and dad showed me about who God was and who he is.
I like that story about the consignment shop. I like the story about the record bin. Speaking of records, it's time for a little show and share.
Uh-oh.
Boy, this means the world to me. And apparently to you, because you wrote the word wow when you autographed it for me. What are you and I looking at here?
Well, the wow thing is, what was I thinking? It's my first record. We got the idea out of some eyeglass magazine. My head's floating in a grid. It makes no sense at all.
What is the absolute first thing you thought of when I brought this? Like a memory from this record right here. You went, oh.
No, I automatically thought about the Alan Parsons Project, because that's why I called it the Michael W. Smith Project. I was so in love with that Alan Parsons Project. I thought, why don't we call it the Michael W. Smith Project? It's my first record. Friends is on there, and You Need a Savior, and The Race is On, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just was having fun, and I cut all these songs and had a blast.
Do you remember the very first time you heard your own recorded music and how that made you feel?
Yeah, I was ecstatic. Wow, I'm on the radio. How did this all happen? It's pretty incredible when every artist will probably tell you that. You hear your song on the radio, you're on the radio, and there's thousands of people listening to this on the radio. It's a big deal. I don't know if they were doing singles back then. Friends was never a single, but it's the most popular song on the record. But Great Is the Lord is the one that seemed to find its way on radio for some reason. That's what I remember hearing.
Show and share time.
Whoa, the second one.
The second album, Very Argyle.
Very Argyle. I jumped for 3 hours. What was I doing? Again, another who's in charge at the label? Why am I jumping for 3 hours?
You have no idea how bad 14-year-old Corey wanted that sweatshirt right there.
Well, guess what? I still have it.
You do not.
Yes, I do.
Next question. Does it still fit?
I think I should give it to you. What do you think?
Don't make me start crying right now. Big picture. This one has one of three big Smitty memories to me. It's 1986, and my mom hires me to wash the front of lockboxes at the bank that she manages. And I had one cassette for that whole summer.
Wow.
I used to stare at this cassette cover. I got the record now. My senior photo is completely this. I had to have this. You had
a bolo?
I had a bolo tie, but when I listened to this cassette, I remember going, this is as good as the songs I hear on the radio sonically. What's the first thing that came to mind when I held this up? Big picture.
It's the most expensive record I've ever made, so I don't know if I ever recouped the budget, but it sure was fun. It was a big departure. I had a blast. I listened to it. I also think of this, there's very little bottom end on it, which kind of bothers me. I wish I could go back and remix that record, but there's some really important songs on there. To me, there's some things that are prophetic. Like one of my favorite songs on that record is Wired for Sound. That song sounds like it was written this morning for the times we're living in. Obviously, Rocket Town's on there, Old Enough to Know.
Rocket Town was the end of side 1. That's when I had to flip my cassette. I totally remember.
You had to flip it.
And I remember hearing You're All Right for the first time and thinking, I can't wait to see this guy live. If he can pull off that riff and that guitar, little hairband Corey is going to be super excited. I was drinking the Smitty Kool-Aid in the 80s and the early 90s, and Freedom comes out, the album Freedom. And I'm slightly dismayed because it's an instrumental, and we don't have social media and the internet. I didn't know it was going to be an instrumental record. But then I had a real sense of this guy loves soundtracks, movie soundtracks, these moving pieces of music. Top 3 movie soundtracks. Go.
Schindler's List, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and The Mission by Ennio Morricone. The first 2 by John Williams.
What makes them so great?
Bum, ba, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum. The music marries so well to the picture. The same with Schindler's List. Well, that Schindler's List theme is just so emotional. And then The Mission, that might be my number 1, but John Williams is my favorite composer. But what Ennio Morricone did on The Mission was brilliant, in my opinion. And that movie was amazing. You know, all 3 movies. Raiders of the Lost Ark is my favorite movie of all time. I saw it 28 times in movie theater.
28 times. For the record, we are talking about 28 times. Wow.
I've told the story. I realized, I fell in love with the character Indiana Jones, but then I realized like the 14th or 15th time going, oh my gosh, I'm not coming back for the picture. I'm coming back for the music. And that's when I fell in love with John Williams. And that's when I started writing cinematic music. When the Raiders came out in 81, that's when I started writing all these movie themes. And it took me 19 years before I ever did my first instrumental record. It took me forever to talk my record company into let me do that. But it all started with Raiders.
All the work, all the effort, everything in place for a new album. You've been through this process so many times. The marketing plan, a tour's in place. Your album Worship comes out on September 11th. What was that day like for you?
Very surreal. Well, I was on a promotional tour. I was in Chicago the night before. I was going to be gone all week. And then I remember that night, in Chicago, I was supposed to be in Atlanta in the afternoon. I was going to stay and fly to Atlanta. And then I just had a funny feeling of going, I just decided to just jump on the plane. I got on the plane, came home from Chicago and thought, I'll just jump on a plane sometime in the afternoon and head to Atlanta. Well, we're living at our farm at the time because they're redoing our kitchen. We have a big barn, sleeps 14. So we're way out in the country, 20 minutes from our house. And then I'm on my way to the studio, and my wife, Debbie, is taking the kids to school that day. And then she calls and say, hey, have you seen the news? They say a plane's hit the tower. And I went, oh, a small plane? So weird. So I get the studio, turn the TV on. And then obviously it's over at that point. You're in literally disbelief of what you're watching on TV, you know. So you're glued to it and you're just overwhelmed. And then it didn't dawn on me till I came home that night. Obviously the airspace is shut down. They've shut everything down. And it doesn't dawn on me till 7:00 that night going, oh my goodness, my record came out today. I completely forgotten about it. And so what I thought would be the least successful record of my career ends up being the biggest one. And that was all done out of obedience. It's a whole other story. I remember every little detail of that day as well.
Story number 2 for you of my Smitty fandom. I'm in a parking lot at a pizzeria, dropping my wife off. We're meeting a couple to eat. I drop her off at the front door. I'm going to go park. And we have Worship in our car. I'm listening to the CD. We both loved it. And Let It Rain is playing. And that amazing moment where someone with an incredible accent starts reading what I think is Isaiah. And I'd heard it before. Michael, I had it on repeat, but there was something about you singing and then him reading that I was openly weeping in the car. And like, I can't go into this restaurant. I'm a mess. And my wife came out and she's like, "Are you all right?" And I'm like, no. I'm having a moment with this record.
That was a moment. And it's actually Psalm, 89 or 90 or 88. I should know that, but it's either 88, 89, 90, 91, whatever. And it was quoted by Darren Whitehead. And Darren is a good friend of mine who now pastors Church of the City, and he's from Australia. And so I took him down and I asked him, I said, I want you to read a scripture in the middle of Let It Rain. I felt like this is going to be a moment, maybe the atmosphere will change and we're going to cry out to God to heal our nation, to heal our people, all that kind of stuff. And it all was kind of spontaneous. And I just sort of looked at him and, kind of gave him the eyes, but we're going to wind this thing down the middle, come out, read that scripture. And then the place exploded. I mean, literally the whole Carpenter's Home Church, 10,000 people. It was full on. And I was just trying to do my best to keep myself together because I'm overwhelmed. It's still to this day, if I go back and listen to that, I have to get the Kleenex out. It still moves me to this day.
You are one of the rare artists who has experienced what we call a crossover success. I was there for both of them because I was working in mainstream radio at the time, Place in This World, and then I Will Be Here For You. What was that experience like? And I'm going to say this to you sarcastically. As an artist, did it solve all of the problems that had built up as an artist getting mainstream success?
I loved it. It was an exciting time. I have to admit I had to continue to check my ego, and people are all talking about Place in This World, and you crossed over, and and then all the temptations, you have to keep all that in check because all of a sudden I'm thrust into this whole other world. Thankfully, I had a great team with me, and I didn't fall off the cliff. But I loved it because of there's countless stories. I could probably write a complete book just about that year or two when all that went down, about being a light in dark places. It kind of felt like going, man, this is kind of what I'm supposed to be doing all the days of my life, is being a light in dark places. But all of a sudden you're thrust into it because of a song, and you're doing these star parties for all these radio people. But the opportunities that I had to be a light, and the moments that were, oh my gosh, it's just, I just will never forget it. I remember the two things coming to my mind. I remember doing VH1 Countdown with Luther Vandross, which was crazy. That's a whole other story in itself. But the makeup lady doing my makeup, and she just looked at me and she said, "There's something different about you." And I thought she was flirting with me, really, at first. I realized when she saw something inside of me, and she said, "There's something different about you." And I said, "Well," she said, "What is it?" I said, "You want to know what it is?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "It's just Jesus. It's changed my life." And she had big tears rolling down her cheeks. Lots of moments like that. Another, when I went and sang Places World, I was doing a star party, which, a lot of people probably don't know what that is. You're thanking stations that have taken your P1 stations, P2 stations, taking your song to, the number one on their chart. And so you go do a star party, and I'm in this big bar, believe it or not, and held in Louisiana. The station's in Texas, but they had it in Louisiana because you could drink at 18. And there was like 2,000 kids in there, and everybody was smashed. And I'm up there singing, going, what am I doing here? And so I sang Emily a song, and I had somebody threw a beer can and hit me in the shoulder, and beer sprayed all over my face. And I was livid. I mean, I was like, and I'm a peacemaker. I don't get riled up too often, but I wanted to fight. I wanted to jump off the stage and find out who did this, whatever. So then I went into Place in This World, and everybody's got their hands up in the air, and everybody's singing Place in This World. I'm steaming. I'm angry through the whole thing. I finished the song. I walk outside. We're out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm probably cussing, probably. I have no idea. I just know that I'm going, I don't understand why I'm here. So I'm just venting out back, and there's a door you could see, kind of almost like it wasn't a backstage door, but a door was open. You could see all those kids in there, and they're all smashed. And I'm looking, I'm angry just looking at them. And then I heard the voice of God say to me, I don't say that very often. He said, "You see those kids?" He said, "I love them, and I want you to love them too. Well, then I just broke down on my hands and knees, and I wept in that cornfield for 5 or 10 minutes. That was a sort of a moment in time for me about, you know what? Place This World's on the radio, not just so you can have a number 1 hit or a number 6 hit on top 40 radio. This is opening up opportunities for you to be able to, you know, be a beacon of light and be a conduit for what I want to do for people. And so then I was just keenly aware from that moment on. I just kept going, God, what's my next assignment? And let me be full on and be present wherever I'm at.
I follow your son-in-law, Sam, on social media. We go back a few years when he was in the band Luminate, and I saw a picture of a new grandbaby. Congratulations, by the way. What advice do you give to a first-time grandparent who just learned the news as well?
Oh, are you a grandparent?
Yeah, my 27-year-old gave us the news 2 weeks ago on her birthday.
That you're going to be a grandparent?
Yes.
Oh, bro, it's going to change your life. You know what? It's so hard to explain. It's different than having your own. It's more emotional on some level because your child is having a baby. And it just seemed like yesterday they were 5 years old. Where did the time go? I mean, all this, and you're thankful, and oh God, thank you for my kids, and thank you for your provision. And we survived. You know what I'm saying? All that stuff. But it's hard to. And then you hold the baby, and it's just like, and you're just completely overwhelmed. I felt the same way holding William Paul Hancock the other day. This is probably the same feeling I had when I held Audrey for the first time, who's now 17, my oldest. So it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I love being, they call me G Daddy, which I kind of like that. And they call Debbie Nana. And we are very, very involved being grandparents. We love it. And everybody lives here except Sam and Emily and their two children. They live in Indiana, just 3 hours door to door, but we see them a lot. So it's a great season for us.
What is something Michael W. Smith will never say no to?
Oh, that's a good question. Whatever my wife wants. Sure.
Happy wife, happy life.
Exactly.
What assumptions do you think people, fans like me, make based on your career from the outside looking in?
Well, I think I'm not saying this is with everybody, but I think a lot of people look at celebrities like we all got it together and we live the wonderful life because we have an audience and we're famous and all that sort of thing. And most of those people don't really know who I really am. I try to convey some of that through some of my social media posts. And, you know, I don't like to talk about my awards. I like to talk about my family, you know, so hopefully they know a little bit about my heart, which hopefully is pure and all about the right things. But maybe I think they assume that they don't probably realize that we got issues and we got problems like everybody else. You know, it's almost like we get a free pass or something. But that's probably the assumption is that, yeah. And there's just something about the being famous that is really uncomfortable for me. I don't know really how to solve that other than just if I'm one-on-one or if I'm on stage that I can diffuse that. And I love when I get a comment going, golly, man, he's really nice. He's normal. And they think I'm going to be something that's not that. It's fun to diffuse that and go, oh man, he's just like, he takes his kids to school just like everybody else does. He goes to the grocery store. You know what I'm saying? That's what I do.
Friends was not a hit on that first album, but if you do not do it live, the fans riot. I think I've seen this in person. What do you personally value most in a friend?
Just unconditional love, brotherhood. It was a brotherhood thing today, you know, where he's one of my dearest friends. And I don't see him enough because he lives way on the other side of town. He's an actor, but he's really a deep guy. We can kind of confess some things to each other and sort of not pretend and kind of get real with each other. And so but he's been a great friend for a very, very long time. So just we just love, it's unconditional love, you know. I think that's the big thing.
Is there anybody left to work or duet with And if so, why has that not happened?
Well, I've always wanted to have John Williams arrange one of my pieces of music. I know that's a long shot because he doesn't really do that. And I was actually just talking to Ted T about that. I told him that was kind of one of my dreams. And Ted said, we're going to make it happen. All right, Ted. All right, you can make it happen. And then also, I'm really good friends with a guy named Bo Cooper, who's musical director for David Foster, which I've done David forever. And I said something to Bo about that. And Bo says, oh, we got connections to John Williams. I mean, who knows? He might, all he can do is say no, So I've got a batch of new cinematic things I'd like to release at some point, but I better do it sooner than later. He's like in his 90s, but he's still kicking. He's still killing it. He's still just writing these amazing, amazing orchestrations and these great melodies. So I've learned more about music from John Williams than anybody because he's a melody guy and he weaves these melodies throughout these movies. It's amazing.
What does Michael W. Smith need brutal, honest advice about?
Ooh, wow. That's a good question. What do I need brutal, honest advice about? Probably, I would say, how to leverage my influence for good. And I'm not talking about buy me a bigger house, give me a bigger car. I'm talking about how do you leverage. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job with that, but how do you here I am, I've got this platform, which is allowed me to work with all these people all around the world. I've got Rocketown, which I came up with. Bono and I are working on Africa, the AIDS initiative, or even Compassion. A lot of that stuff would never have happened if the platform hadn't happened. The platform happens because it became successful. How do you leverage that for even a greater good? How can you have a consultant come in and going, here's what you could do that might literally change millions of lives? That's probably what I would like to have some counsel on. How to do it better.
You're touring the Million Lights album, and you come to Indiana, and I reach out to the powers that be and said, I'd really like to take my aunt and uncle to see Smitty. That happened, so it's my wife, myself, my aunt and uncle, and we get 15 minutes with you in a hallway. I assumed there'd be 30 or 40 people, but it was just the 5 of us. And my uncle turns to you, and he had just gotten on the other side of open heart surgery. And it was scary there for a while. He's older, and the heartfelt look on his face being able to tell you that this is how I fight my battles got me through that surgery. And hearing that song pre-op, post-op, post-op, and hearing that song in rehab, just being able to tell the artist what that song meant to him. I saw the kindness that you've learned from your parents in that moment that you allowed him to say that. I saw such a human side of one of my favorite artists that I cannot say thank you enough for that moment. Your music means so much to me. So I just wanted to say thank you for 15 minutes.
I'm glad I got to do that. I actually kind of remember that, actually. I do remember that.
Probably because he was head to toe in purple. I don't know what he was thinking.
Called royalty.
Michael W. Smith, this has been just such a delight. I've met you a handful of times throughout the years, and you sincerely have always been kind to me with your time. I've always wanted to have this chat with you. You've lived up in my head what I thought it would be.
Thank you. I got the call about the interview, and I said I'd love to do it. I knew it was a bucket list. I think it was. And say, let's do this. I've got time to do it. I'd love to do it. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. I really have. Thank you for what you do.
Michael, sincerely, thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your week and weekend. And I hope I get to shake your hand in person real soon.
We'll do it. All right. Have a great day.
What Else with Corey Mann, with your host, Corey Mann. Original music and theme song by Chris Cron. Share this episode with a friend, and thanks for listening.